G'day, welcome to Market Sam After Work. Today I want to do another video on wind. Now this is only a short video. It goes with some other videos that I've done on the channel, and I suppose that someday or another it'll turn into part of a catalogue. But like I said, to do with wind. And it's in reference to comments I have heard, both in comments on social media or YouTube, that sort of things, but also in the field and talking to people, and that is about whether it's there must have been really hard to shoot in the wind, or I don't like to shoot in the wind, or it's too hard to do what they want to do shooting wise in the wind. Very challenging because of the wind. And to some degree or another, there's some real reference to that, or some genuineness to those comments, but I think there's also some misunderstanding to it, and that's really what I want to clear up today. Shooting in the wind and the effectiveness or accuracy or difficulty of shooting in the wind. The biggest deal with shooting with wind is it's whether it's a consistent wind or it's a non-consistent wind. If you've got an erratic wind, that's hard to shoot in. If you've got a consistent wind, then for a one-off shot, for a hunting shot, yes, you've got to read it exactly, and it's certainly the more wind you've got, the less distance you're going to do that with accurately. If you've got one shot, it's got to count. Then, listen, I would say in general, unless you've got dead calm, that's always an issue. It's always a concern in that situation. And the better you can read the wind, and the more accurately you can read the wind, the more distance you can put into that one shot. There's other ethical things to understand. If you're talking about hunting and you're talking about potential animal moving, then I go with, I don't really recommend over half a second, but at a second you've got maybe some control, but a lot can happen in a second. So the ethical hunting, that's a different conversation. But the way of the one shot and getting it to go exactly where you want to go, and it's your first shot, then hey, there's some big issues with it, and distance is involved with how much you can read the wind. But obviously, the better you can read the wind, the better you can do things. But if we just get past that one shot into actually shooting, so whether it's a competition or it's multiple shots, or even if it's hunting, but you've got multiple shots, you can take a shot and you've got another shot and that sort of stuff. So you can get an idea of the wind with being able to shoot more than once. Then consistency is the big deal. Now, and what I'm really leading into there is that I have shot on days that are very calm wind, and this is more ELR based, so you have to put reference into that's where I'm really coming from. So extreme long range shooting, which is really, it depends on the caliber. Like I said, it isn't a distance, but let's go with 1,000 yards to 3,000 yards and everything in between. The closer it is, the easier; the further it is, the harder. But I've shot on a calm day at, let's say, 2,000 meters, and found it very difficult because calm doesn't mean still. We're talking it's just mild winds and not high enough to be able to read them properly and seeing where things are wandering around to the point you go, what the hell's going on? Is the round bad? Is the rifle bad? Am I being no good? What's wrong here? And actually, with enough experience, I can tell you what was wrong there is that over that distance, you only need a 3 mile an hour, 5 kilometre an hour wind to make a decent movement to your shot. And at that speed of wind, they get hard to read. You get hard to see the changes in the wind. So you don't get to see anything, you get to see the result. And actually moving around 10 inches, 15 inches, 20 inches of movement around can be simply that low wind swapping from one side to the other side. It was going this way, now it's going that way. And you couldn't read it because there's not enough of it to actually show you very much. Keeping in mind what's at the target flag is only one piece of your wind. The mid-range wind, the high-level wind, the wind at you is easy to read, the wind at target's easy to read, the wind in between, not so easy to read. So what I generally find in that sort of shooting, in my long range to extreme long range, I tend to prefer the 5 mile an hour at a minimum, but probably really in the 8 to 15 miles an hour. In the 10 to 20 kilometers an hour of wind speed. In that wind, as long as it's coming from a fairly clean direction, so it's not trying to run around the side of a hill or around a tree bank or that sort of stuff. It's got a clean direction across my shooting area, so that's mid-range, that's me, that's mid-range, that's target. More mid-range and target than my area, because the things I've been through before. At the shooter's end, your bullet, once it leaves the muzzle, is travelling at its fastest. It gets through the air. It's still affected by wind, but it gets through it as fast as possible. Mid-range is starting to slow down. At target, it slows down even more. So the further it goes out, the more it's affected by wind. But wind has more effect on it. So in those speeds, in those mid-range, mild wind, mild to medium level wind with a constant wind, that can be the most accurate shooting. That has been the most accurate shooting I've done. In my area, I've never had dead calm, and I've never had dead calm particularly without having mirage. And I would cause mirage far more an enemy than I would cause wind. Wind I can read, and I'm looking at where things are. Mirage, the target isn't necessarily where you're looking at. A boiling image doesn't mean it's boiling in exactly the position you think it is, or is it sitting still? So mirage, much more an enemy as far as I'm concerned. But wind, the enemy in wind is irregular wind. It isn't wind, is what I'm trying to say. And that even includes, as much as it gets crazy once you get into 20 miles an hour or 30 kilometers an hour and up from there wind, it gets hard to do everything else. From buffeting, from keeping your brain turned on when you've got movement, from the spot of being able to see things, from there's other bits and pieces. Truthfully, as long as you can adjust onto it, then even if it is a 25 miles an hour wind, you can still see super accurate things because it's a consistent wind. The main enemy is erratic wind. When it's erratic, when it's changing, when you can't read it. And there's various things that cause that. Like I said, a really low wind can actually cause this because it's just sort of wafting around and it's going this way at target, then that way at target. Maybe it's all generally going that way or generally going this way, but the actual winds you're dealing with haven't really found their direction. Once you get into that 5 miles an hour and up, or 8 to 10 k's an hour and up, then you tend to find that flow of that movement of air, that wind, becomes consistent. And I tend to term it like you can lean on the wind. And what I'm trying to say with that is, there's an image of being able to lean up against the wind. What I'm actually saying is that it gets to a point where I know where it is, I'm dialed in for it, and it stays in that place. And you tend to find in that sort of wind, when it changes, it tends to change, and it's a little time for it to change. What I mean by that is, it lifted from 8 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour, but it doesn't instantly go back to 8 miles an hour in that moderate wind form. Generally, got to be coming from the right place, that sort of stuff, but you can actually sort of lean on it. You can rely on it. It keeps on doing the same thing. And I've seen some ridiculously small groups just because that wind was nice and consistent. Now, two things I would say to try and understand that. The best way, and this includes reading wind, but certainly learning how to shoot with wind, all the rest of it, is get out there and do it. My honest call on this, you can do training courses, you can watch YouTube videos, you can read books, and you can do all sorts of stuff to try and interpret how to read the mirage, to read your wind speed, how to read the trees, how to look at your flag, all these bits and pieces. And try and learn it that way. The only way to actually learn it is to be out there and do it. Now, that doesn't mean shooting particularly. It can be getting a wind speed reading in some form or other that you can trust and looking at all those conditions and seeing them. I tend to find, certainly the way I've learned to read wind, to understand winds, is out there doing it. So my call is, the end of this video is my strategy to this video is, don't be frightened of the wind. Get out there and shoot in it. You'll get better at your wind calls. But I suppose what I'm really saying is some of the best stuff you've seen me do will be a moderate level wind. It's not because I'm a brilliant wind reader. It's because in that moderate level wind is where sometimes you'll find the most consistent wind. And that's the real enemy in wind, is irregular wind. The consistent wind, apart from finding it on the first time, and the more skilled you get at reading, the better you'll get at that. But once you've shot in your moderate level, consistent wind and corrected for exactly what it is, you'll tend to find it stays consistent. Anyway, I think I've been around that enough, enough loops around that rabbit hole there. I hope that makes some sense. Don't be frightened of the wind. Get out there and shoot. In general, get out there and shoot. But that's the video for today, guys. I hope that made some sense. Thanks for checking in. We'll catch you next time.